It was a sweltering July evening in 1954 at Sun Studio in Memphis, Tennessee. Elvis Presley, a shy 19-year-old truck driver, had been called in by Sam Phillips, the owner of the small recording studio and independent record label. Elvis had been there a few times before, but Phillips hadn't heard that spark he was looking for until tonight. As Elvis fooled around with his guitar, he suddenly launched into an impromptu rendition of the blues song, "That's All Right" by Arthur Crudup. Backing Elvis were two local musicians Phillips had called in, guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black. As they tore into the song with wild abandon, injecting an infectious new energy into the old blues number, Sam Phillips pricked up his ears. He rushed out of the control booth and told them to start over from the top so he could record it. In that moment, something clicked. It was the sound Sam Phillips had been dreaming of, a fusion of blues, country, pop, and something else entirely new. A white singer blending black and white musical traditions in a way no one had done before. Phillips knew they had made musical history that night. Rock and roll was born. Word of this revolutionary new sound began to spread around Memphis as DJ Dewey Phillips played "That's All Right" on his popular radio show Red, Hot and Blue. The switchboard lit up with calls demanding to know who the singer was. When Dewey revealed it was Elvis Presley, a young white boy, listeners black and white were shocked and thrilled. They had never heard anything quite like it. Seemingly overnight, Elvis became a local celebrity in Memphis. Girls screamed and fought over him at his live shows. He had a sultry voice, smoldering good looks, and most of all, a sexually charged stage presence the likes of which no one had seen before. His hips gyrated scandalously to the music, making the girls go wild and the boys jealous. Conservative adults were scandalized by Elvis's wanton movements. But the more the grown-ups tut-tutted, the more the kids went crazy for him. Sam Phillips worked hard to spread Elvis's music beyond Memphis, but met a lot of resistance. R&B stations said he sounded too white. Country stations complained he was too black. Elvis and his raucous music didn't fit neatly into any category. He was too country for the blues, too blues for the country. What Sam Phillips saw as his greatest asset, the unique blending of black and white styles, many in the segregated South saw as his greatest liability. But among open-minded teenagers, especially those who had grown up alongside the vibrant Memphis music scene with its heady mix of R&B and hillbilly sounds, Elvis was a revelation. His fresh, daring sound tapped into something essential about being young in the 1950s. They sensed the world was changing fast and the old rules didn't apply anymore. And Elvis Presley was the sound of that change. He was a rebel and an outsider just like them. Despite the obstacles, Elvis's star continued to rise in the Mid-South thanks to relentless touring. With his raw magnetism and sex appeal, he drove teenage girls into fits of mass hysteria while horrifying their parents. This only fueled his notoriety and appeal. Suddenly, every kid in the South wanted Elvis's slicked-back hair and long sideburns, his flashy clothes, his sexy sneer, his dangerous aura. A full-blown cultural phenomenon was brewing. Sam Phillips and Elvis's manager Bob Neal could see that Elvis had the potential for much bigger things. He needed to break out of the local Southern market and go national. But Sun Records was too small a label to give him that kind of push. As 1955 progressed, interest came in from scouts at the big national record labels who had gotten wind of this young singing sensation down in Memphis. Elvis was initially reluctant to leave Sun, the label that had nurtured his talents. But by the fall, he came around to the idea, especially after meeting Colonel Tom Parker. Parker was a wheeler-dealer Carney veteran turned music promoter who had helped launch the mainstream career of country star Eddie Arnold, a mysterious Dutchman with a shadowy past. He saw Elvis's vast potential and wooed him aggressively. Parker convinced Elvis and his parents that with a major label behind him and Parker as his manager, Elvis could become the biggest star in the country. Even Sam Phillips reluctantly agreed it was time for his protege to leave the nest. In November 1955, Elvis signed with RCA Records for the unheard of sum of $35,000. It was an extraordinary vote of confidence in a regional performer. Some at RCA openly fretted they were being fleeced by Parker, but Elvis's first RCA single proved them wrong. Heartbreak Hotel, released in January 1956, shot to #1 on the pop charts and sold over 1 million copies. Elvis Presley had officially arrived as a national star. What followed was a whirlwind year of unparalleled success. Elvis dominated the pop charts, scoring an astonishing 17 top 100 singles in 1956 alone. He conquered TV with explosive appearances on Stage Show, The Milton Berle Show, and most infamously, The Ed Sullivan Show. His electrifying hip swivels on Sullivan were so scandalous they were only shown from the waist up. Elvis's first movie, Love Me Tender, shattered box office records. His concerts were pandemonium. Teenage girls screamed, cried, and fainted as he shimmied across the stage, in a mass frenzy of lust never before witnessed. Reporters dubbed it Elvis Mania. Parents, preachers, and pundits denounced Elvis as vulgar and morally corrupting. One congressman even called him a symbol of a lewd breed of vulgar Hollywood characters undermining the youth. Through it all, Colonel Parker skillfully fanned the flames of controversy, using the outrage over Elvis's sexuality to generate massive publicity. He crafted a rebel image that made Elvis thrillingly dangerous, positioning him as a threat to the staid social order that 1950s teenagers were eager to overturn. In a time of conformity, Elvis stood for youthful rebellion. In a time of repression and segregation, his sound was racially and sexually transgressive. Yet at the same time, Parker marketed Elvis as a polite Southern boy who loved his mama. He was a rebel, yes, but also an all-American boy. It was a delicate balancing act that broadened his appeal. By the end of 1956, Elvis Presley was the hottest star in the country, with a popularity unseen since Frank Sinatra. And much like Sinatra with his screaming Bobby Soxers, Elvis's fan base was built on the frenzied adoration of teenage girls. They were his secret weapon. Elvis's meteoric rise signaled more than just the birth of a new kind of music. It reflected the rise of youth culture as a revolutionizing force in American life. The baby boom was coming of age and changed everything it touched: fashion, movies, TV, sex, money, values. At the forefront of the massive changes convulsing post-war society was the most disruptive force of all: the American teenager. The word teenager had barely existed before World War II, but in the affluent 1950s, a new kind of adolescent emerged. Freed from the burdens of depression and war, with more leisure time and disposable income than ever before, teens were primed to turn pop culture upside down. They had spending power and specific tastes. They were the first generation raised on TV and rock and roll. All of a sudden, teenagers mattered. Their desires, their rebellious attitudes, their screaming voices. The music industry realized there was a huge untapped market in selling to American youth. They just needed someone to rally around. They found their ringleader in Elvis. With his dangerous sexuality, his insolent sneer, his racially mixed sound, Elvis gave teens their own language of rebellion. Adults were shocked to see girls reacting with such sexual frenzy over Elvis, but that was the point. He gave teens a form of cultural expression that was theirs and theirs alone. They staked out a place for youthful rebellion in American life. Elvis showed that teenagers' tastes couldn't be ignored. They had the power to create a cultural sensation, seemingly out of nowhere. Elvis hadn't gotten any radio play outside the Memphis area. There was no YouTube in 1956, no internet to spread the word. His rise was fueled almost entirely by the screaming enthusiasm of live crowds. Teens didn't just love Elvis. They felt a sense of ownership over him. He was the first true teen idol. Not a Sinatra-style crooner their parents approved of, but someone raw and young and dangerous that teens could claim as their own. They were the ones who had discovered him, made him a star through their sheer mass enthusiasm. Elvis belonged to them. The shock waves of Elvis mania rippled through the culture, changing it profoundly. Advertisers, marketers, and Hollywood rushed to capitalize on the rising youth demographic. Teens became the driving force in American pop culture, the arbiters of what was hip and new. A whole industry sprang up catering to their tastes, from teen magazines to beach party movies to silly love songs on the radio. The modern concept of the teenager was born. But while most teens embraced their new teen king, many adults feared him. As the Elvis the Pelvis controversy raged, The generation gap widened into an all-out culture war. Elvis became a symbol of the threat rock and roll posed to traditional values. He unleashed a wave of parent and preacher backlash, but it backfired spectacularly. The more adults condemned Elvis, the more teens worshipped him. Through Elvis, rock became the soundtrack of youthful rebellion. For teens, the magic of Elvis was the sense that he was one of them. He came from humble beginnings, the son of a poor Mississippi sharecropper. He grew up in public housing and worked odd jobs before being discovered. There was an everyman quality about him, despite his impossible beauty. He was a genuine regional character, a flesh and blood Southern boy, not some prefabricated pop star from the big city. His rise was like a classic American rags to riches fable that teens could both relate to and fantasize about. His stardom seemed simultaneously incredible yet attainable, because he was their Elvis. Somehow both a regular kid and the coolest guy on earth at the same time. Elvis represented a new kind of masculinity for teens to aspire to. He wasn't a clean-cut crooner or macho He-Man like John Wayne. With his pretty face, eyeliner, and racy dance moves, he presented a more androgynous image that blurred gender lines. He sang about vulnerability and heartache in a quavering voice modeled on the blues wail of black R&B singers. His stage persona was cocky yet wounded, making him seem both soft and edgy, a rebel and a mama's boy in one. It was a whole new kind of sex symbol perfectly calibrated for teenagers, both girls and boys. Elvis wasn't the first white performer to borrow from black music, but he did it in a way that was especially youthful and daring. By embracing black music so openly at a time when much of America was still segregated, he was making a powerful cultural statement, whether he intended to or not. Embracing blackness became the ultimate expression of white teenage rebellion. Elvis challenged the color lines of a deeply racist society and made it thrilling, cool, sexy. When Elvis shook his hips, he was shaking up more than just the staid music scene. He was shaking the foundations of American culture and paving the way for the massive upheavals to come in the 1960s. It was no wonder that adults were terrified of him. But the genius of Elvis was that his music, while groundbreaking, was also deeply rooted in tradition. The folk and country songs he grew up with, the black gospel and blues he absorbed, even the pop crooners he adored as a kid, he synthesized them all into a fresh young style immediately recognizable as his own. It was a sound both cutting-edge and comforting, able to appeal to listeners of all ages. He wasn't just a singer or musician, though his talents in those areas were exceptional. More than anything, Elvis was a riveting performer, a once-in-a-generation showman whose magnetism pulled the whole culture along in his wake. After Elvis, there was rock and roll, distinct from rhythm and blues or country in spirit and style. After Elvis, there was the American teenager as a cultural and economic force to be reckoned with. After Elvis, nothing would ever be the same. While Elvis reveled in stardom, his sudden fame took a toll on him and those closest to him. His mother Gladys was deeply disturbed by her son's sexualized image. She feared his wild new life would lead him to ruin and desperately missed the shy, sweet boy she had raised. Elvis was devoted to Gladys, and her disapproval ate at him, creating underlying tensions in his breakneck rise. Elvis's high school girlfriend Dixie was also unnerved by his growing notoriety. She worried Elvis mania, and the legions of adoring female fans would steal him away from her forever. Elvis was caught between the down-home values he was raised with and the limitless temptations of fame. It was a conflict that would come to define him. Priscilla Beaulieu, the teenage girl Elvis began dating in 1959 while stationed in Germany with the army, witnessed these tensions up close. She spent hours talking with Elvis's mother at Graceland and saw how desperately Gladys clung to her boy as the world tried to wrest him away. Gladys fretted that no girl was good enough for Elvis and that stardom was ruining him like it had so many others. "I hate to see what it's doing to my boy," Priscilla recalls Gladys saying through tears. The weight of fame was crushing them all. When Gladys died suddenly in 1958, at the untimely age of 46, Elvis was devastated. He had always struggled with the loss of his twin brother at birth and harbored an obsessive fear of abandonment. Now fame had taken the person he loved most in the world. The grief paralyzed him, As Tom Parker pushed Elvis to capitalize on his fame with an endless stream of films and soundtrack albums in the 1960s, artistic stagnation began to set in. Many critics dismissed Elvis as a teeny-bopper movie star making throwaway pop songs, far from his roots as a raw rocker. Some of his old Sun Records fans called him a sellout. Even some new groups, like the Beatles, surpassed him on the charts with a fresher, hipper sound. But seeing the Beatles on TV in 1964 reignited Elvis's competitive fire. He was determined to reclaim his crown as the king of rock and roll. In his legendary 1968 comeback special on NBC, Elvis proved he still had the magic. Dressed head to toe in black leather, he gave an electrifying performance that reminded the world what a charismatic rocker he could be. Newly energized, Elvis took bold steps to retake artistic control of his career. Against Colonel Parker's wishes, he stopped making formulaic movies and returned full-time to music. He wanted to get back to his roots, back to the soulful sound that had defined him. For his 1969 album, From Elvis in Memphis, recorded at the famed Chips Moman's American Sound Studio, he delved into the gritty Southern styles that had first inspired him: gospel, country, R&B, and soul. It was his most impassioned, ambitious album in years. The lead single, The Soaring in the Ghetto, was a moving social commentary that topped the charts worldwide. Elvis was back. Riding high on his comeback, Elvis took up residency in Las Vegas in 1969, ruling the Strip like the king he was. His bejeweled jumpsuits, martial arts moves, and epic song medleys made him seem superhuman, almost godlike. He was the ultimate showman, dazzling audiences with his voice and presence. Critics hailed him as one of the most electrifying performers of all time. But offstage, the pressures of fame took an increasingly dark toll. His marriage to Priscilla crumbled, and they divorced in 1973. He became dependent on prescription drugs to keep up with his punishing schedule and ballooning weight. Though his shows remained powerful, he was deteriorating. By the late 70s, he was a bloated, sweaty shadow of his former self. Even his legendary voice began to falter. On August 16, 1977, the man who had changed the course of music and youth culture died on the bathroom floor of Graceland. He was only 42. The cause of death was a massive heart attack, but it was clear his body had been ravaged by years of addiction and overwork. The astonishing turnout for Elvis's funeral, with 80,000 fans lining the streets of Memphis to mourn, showed the immense impact he had on American culture. They wept for the fallen king who had revolutionized music, redefined masculinity and sexuality, bridged black and white cultures, and given voice to the hopes and fears of his generation. In death as in life, Elvis belonged to his fans. In the decades since Elvis's death, his legend has only grown. His iconic status shows no signs of diminishing. If anything, the myth of Elvis has taken on a life of its own, transcending the man himself. He's become a symbol of everything from teenage rebellion to all-American individualism to kitschy excess, inspiring imitation and parody but never indifference. His outsized influence can be seen in nearly every major cultural development of the past half-century. For musicians, Elvis remains the original template for rock stardom: the swagger, the sex appeal, the genre-blurring sound, the image as rebellious outsider. Countless artists have tried to channel his brooding charisma, from Mick Jagger to Michael Jackson to Eminem. His hip-swiveling bravado paved the way for everyone from Jim Morrison to Prince to Harry Styles. No one did it quite like Elvis, but he made generations believe they could try. Elvis's legacy also looms large in movies and television. His meteoric rise and tragic fall has inspired countless biopics and documentaries, from indie films to big-budget extravaganzas. A young actor's career can be made by a convincing portrayal of Presley, as the many imitators suggest. And Elvis remains a go-to reference in pop culture, whether as a punchline for washed-up celebrities or a touchstone of cool. His image is so ubiquitous, so woven into the fabric of Americana, he's become a kind of cultural shorthand. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of Elvis's legacy is the intense connection he forged with his fans. In life, Elvis inspired worship bordering on mania, and that fervor has hardly cooled since his death. His Graceland mansion remains a major tourist destination, a pilgrimage site for those looking to commune with the king. Impersonators still do brisk business embodying Elvis in rhinestone-studded jumpsuits. Fan clubs and appreciation societies abound, as people continue to claim Elvis as their own. Even those who never saw him in person feel a profound bond. That sense of personal connection speaks to Elvis's unique hold on the public imagination. More than a musician or actor or sex symbol, Elvis was a cultural avatar. He embodied the aspirations and anxieties of his era, the thrill of newfound freedoms, the fear of social change. Through Elvis, the public could vicariously experience the wild ride of pursuing the American dream. His struggles with fame, with identity, with the changing times were their struggles. His triumphs were their triumphs. Like all great mythic figures, Elvis's legacy is complex and contradictory. He was a rebel who became the establishment, a sex god who doted on his mother, a country boy who conquered the big city, a millionaire who never lost the common touch. He contained multitudes, and this complexity has allowed his legacy to be embraced by people of all stripes. Elvis can be whatever his fans need him to be: social provocateur, musical messiah, cautionary tale, avatar of cool. His appeal is both universal and deeply personal. As new generations discover Elvis, his myth continues to evolve. Some hail him as a civil rights hero for bringing black music to white audiences. Others see him as a cultural appropriator who built his fame on the uncredited innovations of black musicians. His extravagant lifestyle and grisly demise have taken on the aura of a modern-day parable. Was he a victim of the fame machine or his own worst enemy? A musical genius or a megalomaniacal has-been? The debates rage on. In the end, perhaps it doesn't matter who the real Elvis was. The Elvis of myth has long since eclipsed the mortal man. More than the flesh and blood Elvis Presley, he's an idea, an archetype, a blank screen upon which the public can project its dreams and fears. Dead or alive, he remains the king not just of rock and roll, but of the collective unconscious. His once-in-a-century impact on popular culture is indisputable and ongoing. As long as there are young people hungry to stake their claim in the world, as long as there are outsiders eager to shake up the status quo, as long as there are dreamers determined to blur boundaries and break the rules, Elvis will live on. Not just as a musical icon, but as the original liberating rebel spirit of rock and roll. Elvis didn't just change music, he changed everything. And that change is still unfolding, coursing through the culture like an electric current, potent as ever. Elvis may have left the building, but his revolution rages on.